Hello, Lauren Schaller here, and I'm analyzing this PowerPoint for accessibility. This is a PowerPoint that I presented during a class that took place this school year, and it was for a Zoom synchronous class where I led students through a discussion. It was actually an unexpected day for it. So let's start with the Online Accessibility Handbook Guidelines. So if we go to the outline view and we go to the click on view. Let's take a look at the outline and see if the outline is completely filled out. And you can see that there are some slides where there is not a lot of explanation there, so a student is not necessarily going to be they might be confused because some of these slides have just videos in them and just the question listed at the top, and they might be wondering what that's about. So there's some gaps in the outline here that might not be very accessible to students. The slide layout, it's recommended to go with the pre-made slide layouts that you see here, and there are times when I deviated from those. You can see here I listed a few titles. These are all the same thing for what I was describing. There are similar titles, so I deviated there. This slide, I have a bunch of images kind of shown at the bottom. Some of these pictures are kind of layered over top of each other, and this is an animation here, the stomates that pop up, but that kind of, again, deviates from standard looks. Reading order is pretty good for those who would be using an assistive technology, so I pretty much always go from top to bottom in my text. There is not a table that you can see here, but it's pretty much always top to bottom. For my images, there is often no alternative text. Now this one here isn't too bad. It's described on the left, and you can see it's a diagram that's explained. But there are a few, actually a lot of these look pretty good. This one has some text in it. It's showing you a process of the water cycle, and it's animated, so that's actually not too bad. But I have a few pictures now. This one is not explained off to the side. This is one that I only explained verbally during my presentation, so that would definitely not, but it's not described off to the side here. So as I was presenting this to my class, I was explaining all of these things out loud. Lists, most of my lists are okay, and I use the bullets. There are a few instances, for instance here, and then I know there were a couple more where I do not have nice bullets shown, and like here I don't necessarily have bullets for these vocab words, and I knew that there was one more, but it's mostly okay. I usually have bullets to differentiate my lists. I do not have any links within this document really, so that's don't have to talk about descriptive links or tables. The color is mostly okay. There's very few times that I use color alone to convey a meaning. Now the only time I did was with this situation here, where I incorporated an earlier concept to explain how the petals change color. So, but if you go to if we format the image and we turn it black and white, you can see that actually you can still tell that something happened to the petals. It's very faint, but it would be possible for a colorblind person, if I were describing it and I say, you know, it's like colored the petals of the flower a little bit here when we did this experiment. Video. I do have a couple of videos, but as it turns, and there's no transcript for it, so there's nothing written explaining what's happening. I made a video of myself, but I actually realized later that I forgot, somehow I did not record the sound of my own video, and it's not playing right now for some reason, but you would see me moving around and putting stuff in the beaker. But I actually did not remember to record myself talking in the video anyway, so I was talking over it and explaining what was happening, but there's no transcript of me doing that. So analyzing the PowerPoint for the Universal Design Guidelines, I did not put text-to-speech in here, but I did read everything aloud while I was presenting this PowerPoint. So there are different forms of representation. I have the same concepts shown in demonstrations with some pictures and some explanations. And I did have questions throughout. And I did activate the students' prior knowledge at the beginning. I was actually hoping to meet with them in class, and I was going to have them at the beginning draw what they think the water cycle looks like based on their prior knowledge, and then I had to settle for last minute change, just telling me about it. And the UDL expression, the students, I asked them questions all throughout this presentation continuously to get their feedback, and they had a choice to type their response in the chat, or they were able to just voice aloud, but there was not a lot. And there were, throughout this presentation, I did have different models explaining the same thing. For instance, transpiration was explained to them, and the diagrams and the little animation was shown, and then I referred them back to something we did earlier in class that happened because of transpiration was part of the reason it occurred. So there's a couple of instances where things were explained in different ways, especially evaporation. And still on UDL, talking about engagement, the students didn't really have a lot of choices throughout, unless you count the way that they were answering the questions. Some of these open-ended questions, so I explained the process, and I said, what do you think is going to happen next in the cycle? What happens after condensation if we just kind of keep moving? And I took them through one pathway in the water cycle, so they could, I guess, if you counted that, but otherwise they didn't really have many choices. There was a little bit of personalization at the beginning where I connected the water cycle to what happens in their bodies and why do they think they see their breath when it's cold. Try to get them thinking about their day-to-day lives and their bodily functions and what that has to do with the water cycle. I was hoping, I did get in this class a lot of active participation. A lot of their responses came to me, and a lot of them felt comfortable sending their messages to me because it was often privately sent to me in the chat, so I got a lot more participation than usual. I had an activity at the end, you won't see it here because I had to delete it, where I had them create a device where they had to get fresh water from salt water using what they knew about the water cycle and limited materials. And I ran out of time, and that would have been a collaborative activity through this. However, I was able to actually do it the following session, the next time that I had class with them. So that was kind of added later. Getting to the Rice readings, chapter 8, the students, looking at tier 1 accommodations and modifications, I tell the students at the beginning of these presentations that they do not have to take notes. I didn't want that being added to their workload during this time. So I said, I just want you to pay attention and answer my questions. I'm going to save these notes for you later so that they could access them. So they, because I was teaching at a pace where I didn't think they would have time. And so I gave them reference materials to look at later. There are times when I know I have competing backgrounds. As I move through the slides, some of these I ended up adding some extra layers animated in later, so that might have been competing for their attention. Some of their answers I was just looking for completion. So I often say to the kids, as in these kinds of lessons, I'd rather a thoughtful wrong response than something that's perfect but you didn't think very much about. So I was looking for, just their own thoughtfulness and not necessarily perfection. And so sometimes they were just graded on effort, and I usually tell them every time beforehand. And if they spell something wrong, I don't really care. So tier 2 spelling errors, that was okay. There were frequent, looking at more of what was in the reading, I had frequent check-ins, pretty constant, and I remediated their responses with feedback. They, as I mentioned before, they were sending messages privately to the chat. Notes became available to them later. as far as their attention, I did not dole out special jobs for different needs of students as was recommended in the reading. I did not provide an outline of this presentation really at any point. The students did not have their own access to the PowerPoint during class. I just had it showing on the screen, so they would not have been able to access the accessibility features. But I will say that I did use timers while I was teaching it and gave them a countdown of how much time they had to respond to their questions. And that is my analysis of this particular PowerPoint of the water cycle. Thank you for listening.